Welcome back to Sci-Fi Book Trek. Today we'll be reviewing Monument by Lloyd Biggle Jr. Right, so in this novel it's fairly short, it's 170 odd pages, give or take.
And it's a standalone novel. It's not connected to any franchise. Completely independent story on its own merits.
Yep.
I mean, I say that, but there are certainly themes that you will recognise from
the last book.
Well, I was
once we did, you could connect it somehow to that as well.
I was going to say James Cameron,
but we'll leave
that till later.
Monument was actually a longer version of a story he did by the same name earlier on, because he did a short story version of it in 1961, I believe, in I think it was Analog magazine.
So this is an expanded version of that.
This is an expanded version. And also, a few years after this came out, the rights were optioned and brought by I believe a film studio to maybe make into a film, but that never materialised.
Yeah.
And nobody can do anything about it.
Else about the author?
Okay. The author, Lloyd Biggle Jr., was a sergeant who lived during World War II. He was injured twice, received the Purple Heart for his injuries. His second injury resulted in him being invalided out of the army, where he returned home to his native United States and returned to education, where he studied at Wayne State University
Party on, Wayne.
and the University of Michigan, and received degrees and PhDs at both. He started his professional writing career in 1955 and continued to write until his death in 2002.
This version was published in 1974.
Which brings us on to
publication year. First off, one of the biggest events that took place was Richard Nixon resigns.
Watergate. That's one I've got on my list.
He was sort of, forced to resign, but yes. That happened this year.
For anyone who doesn't know who Richard Nixon is, it's the guy from Futurama.
Puny human number 1, puny human number 2, and Morbo's good friend, Richard Nixon.
Hello, Morbo. How's the family?
Belligerent and numerous.
Also in the share, Leonardo DiCaprio was born.
Whoa. Here I come. Oh, here I come. Oh.
I have. This year saw the launch of the Volkswagen Golf.
Oh. Also, in this year, Lada was first sold in the UK.
Lada the car?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Soviet-built car.
I don't think I've seen one of those for years. Not even classic car shows. This year also saw the invention of the Rubik's Cube, which became officially licensed as a toy in the later years of 1978.
Yes, and took over the world for a brief time. Also, on a stranger and darker tone, a banker killed 2 innocent unarmed women and disappeared. He was called Lord Lucan.
Screw the rules, I have money.
Of course, the next year would be the tail end of the Vietnam War, which, admittedly not during this year, it is going to feature in something that I will say later on in the review.
Well then, so that finished publication year. So we'll go on to characters and what's in the book.
Okay.
Right then, so in this book there's a host of characters.
Yes, there's...
And they tend to come in and out at different points in the story.
There's at least the one character that does tend to be a sort of standout throughout.
Yes.
But it's not told from his perspective so much as it's characters events
interacting with him.
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, some bits are from his perception, but you never really get inside his mind.
Mm. And there's a couple of other characters, Yolan and Hort specifically. They possibly feature as an eyes lens into what is happening, but from a human perspective. The main character, Fawny.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll go with that pronunciation. Yes, pronunciation is going to be a problem.
This book has a lot of internal terminology. There are a lot of alien names for different things. There are a lot of terms and definitions which you get the impression, you get the understanding of what they're supposed to mean.
Or they're described. I mean, most of it, there's certain animals or certain...
Or terms for a person.
Yeah. I wouldn't say overly does it, but it is there.
It is at least explained,
yes.
And you've got context for what they are supposed to be.
3 syllables. First syllable sounds like... head!
But yeah, I think some of the names, though it points out what it roughly is, there can be some confusion, as I think we've had. That sometimes we don't know if it's a title or a chosen name of something. Right, for instance. But most things are described and they've just given a random name which is made up to the book.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, what would you say some of the themes and stuff are?
There's a very heavy anti-colonialism message. There's definitely a sort of comparison that you could make to other types of this type of literature, like your Disney's Pocahontas, your Avatars, your Dances with Wolves. But I would say that there's a very, very clever subversion of those types of tropes in that when you get to the later areas of the book, it goes a very different direction to the way that you would expect if you've seen that type of fiction, without giving away any spoilers.
I mean, I will say one thing on sort of like some of the structure of the book. I was very refreshed how it jumped over some bits that I was dreading coming up, thinking, oh, this is going to be a bit tropey and boring, and it just jumps over them.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it's similar things to some from like last week's War of the Worlds, where it's an advanced, civilized creatures come in to a world and try to put their authority over the inhabitants.
Yeah.
But this way it's more, peaceful to an extent, rather than killing.
It's less invasion.
Yes. Less invasion from like gun barrel and more invasion with
subversion.
Paper.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the bureaucracy element is quite a heavy factor in this, which
I mean, but it never becomes too stifling. So, but yeah, so if you like that sort of books and sort of like I say, sort of the Avatar and sort of that aspects, then it's an interesting read.
Yeah, it's a new take on that type of fiction, I think. And I mean, I say new take. The idea that it's obviously an old story, tale as old as colonialism. The fact that this was published in 1974, and it's a take on that story that is actually refreshing compared to what we see on the screen, like with the Avatar story, Dances with Wolves.
Yeah.
That's all the same story, just told from different perspectives, or sort of different groups slotted in.
Yeah.
Whereas this is a completely new take on that type of thinking, and I find that quite refreshing.
Yeah. And like, I mean, seeing as, you know, it was a military man who wrote this.
Well, yes, and that was another thing that sort of...
It's quite impressive, yeah.
That was another thing that stuck out for me. The fact that this was published during the tail end of the Vietnam War, which the Vietnam War was very much a war of perception. It was the first real war where public perception back home was really starting to have an effect on the way that they could actually run the war at all. And so you can kind of feel those themes kind of creeping into the book. There's a galactic perception of what
without going into spoilers, but yeah, there are aspects of that do feel like, now you've brought up that it was set during that time, like it was wrote during that time. It does feel obvious, especially with some key points of what happens.
Yeah.
And what people try to get to happen, stuff like that.
Yeah. I'd almost feel like it's a little bit propaganda-y, not in a negative way. I mean, it's like almost like Lloyd Biggle Jr. was trying to write a little bit of anti-war propaganda, anti-colonialism propaganda.
Yeah.
But again, like War of the Worlds, I still feel that it was written in such a way that story came before the propaganda.
Yeah. But I would also add, the military people in this come off quite good. As in, there's no sort of negativity towards military.
As being a soldier himself, it
Yes.
probably helped with that respect.
Which, you know, is interesting because normally the military is made to be, you know, the boogeyman in this type of situation.
Yes.
Right then, so we'll go on to recommendations.
I found this a very, very pleasant bedtime read. Certainly, it's a new take on what could be considered a bit of a stifled idea. And personally, I give it a recommendation. I would like to see more people read this. I would like to see the actual adaptation that you were talking about, perhaps a film adaptation, because I think that is something that is needed in the days of the same tired trope every single time.
The people who brought it, I can't find any information about them. That company, so
yeah,
don't know what happened at all.
How do you feel?
Yeah, I genuinely liked it. I did like how it didn't go over the obvious, tired, worn out parts of the story. It always kept trying to either subvert it or try something new.
Yeah.
Or just tell you enough that you need to know, like, oh, this is this. And it was kind of refreshing and nice. And also, it is fairly short. That just means you can get through it fairly quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I recommend it.
Now, with that in mind, this is a very old copy. I know yours isn't particularly new.
Yeah, mine's probably a few years after that.
With the fact that these are quite old copies, I went looking to see whether new copies were available. And yes, you can actually get these in ebook form.
Nice.
So,
right then. So I think that's about it. So, join us next week for our spoiler talk on the book. If you don't, then join us in a fortnight for a review of a completely new book. Bye.
bye. His second injury resulted in him...
The shoe is on the other foot.
His second injury... right, okay, stop.
Hammer time!